Ambassador Kellen 9 remembered the first time he saw a human. The memory still made his 4 hearts beat faster, even after 50 years. The Great Hall of the Galactic Consortium had been buzzing with nervous energy that day. Every species in the galaxy had heard stories about the new arrivals from the Outer Rim. They came from a world so dangerous that most computers refused to calculate survival odds for visiting it. Terra, they called it, a death world of the highest class. Kellen 9 had expected monsters, warriors with claws and fangs, perhaps wearing armor made from the bones of their enemies. The stories said their world tried to kill them every day. Massive predators hunted them. Their weather could freeze or burn flesh in minutes. The very ground shook and split open without warning. Instead, Captain Sarah Chen walked into the hall. Like she was entering a library, she was tall, yes, but not impossibly so. Her skin was darker than most species Kellen 9 knew, and her hair was black and straight. She wore simple clothes in blue and white, with small metal decorations on her chest. Her shoes made soft sounds on the crystal floor. What shocked Kellen 9 most was how careful she was. When Ambassador Flit of the tiny wing folk tried to greet her, Captain Chen got down on one knee. She lowered her voice to barely a whisper. Her massive hands, each one easily large enough to crush Flit completely, moved slowly and gently. She spoke in the high-pitched tones that wing folk found comfortable, even though it clearly hurt her throat. "It is an honor to meet you, respected Flit," she said. "I have studied your people's poetry. The Song of Seven Winds made me cry." Flit nearly fainted from joy. No one ever read wing folk poetry. Their books were too small for most species to handle. When the Veltar delegate arrived, Chen immediately put on the special ear covers that blocked loud sounds. The Veltar used sound speech that could make other species sick or even kill them if they spoke too loudly. Chen had somehow learned to communicate using only hand movements and quiet humming. During the formal dinner, Kellen 9 watched Chen eat, the standard nutrition pace that all species could safely consume. He knew humans were meat eaters. The files said they hunted and killed their food with their bare hands before they learned to make tools. But Chen ate the bland paste without complaint, even though she could probably bite through the metal serving spoons. "Why do you limit yourselves?" Kellen 9 finally asked her during a break in the talks. Chen smiled. It was a gentle expression, nothing like the terrifying baring of teeth that some species use to show aggression. "Because we can," she said simply. "We are strong enough to choose, to be gentle." That was when the humans introduced what they called the Terran Doctrine. The document was longer than most species' entire legal codes. It listed hundreds of ways that humans would limit themselves when dealing with other species. They would not use their full strength in competitions. They would not eat meat in public, since it disturbed herbivore species. They would speak quietly around sound-sensitive species. They would wear special clothes to hide how much muscle they really had. Most importantly, they would keep their military small and purely defensive. "We know what we are," Chen told the assembled delegates. "We come from a world that made us into weapons, but we choose to be shields instead." The consortium voted to accept humanity with only 12 opposing votes. Most species were curious about these strange new beings who could destroy but chose to protect. Over the years, Kellen 9 watched humanity become the galaxy's favorite adopted children. They were strong enough to help with heavy construction work, but gentle enough to trust with the most delicate tasks. Human doctors had hands steady enough to perform surgery on species with organs smaller than their fingernails. Human engineers could build space stations that would last for centuries. Human soldiers were the most popular peacekeepers in the galaxy. They were big enough to stop fights just by showing up, but they always tried talking first. Most conflicts ended when humans simply asked everyone to calm down and work things out. But there were signs, if you knew how to look for them. Kellen 9 noticed that humans never seemed surprised by anything. When the Crystal Raiders attacked the mining station at Beta 7, Human rescue ships arrived so quickly it was like they had been waiting nearby. When the plague of madness swept through the outer colonies, humans had medicine ready before most species even knew what was happening. How? "Did you prepare so fast?" Kellen 9 asked Chen after the plague crisis ended. "We study," Chen said. "We watch, we learn, we prepare for problems before they happen. Even problems that have never happened before." Chen's smile was different that time, still gentle, but with something else behind it. Something that made Kellen 9's scales tingle with an emotion he could not name. "Especially those problems," she said. "The humans established research stations throughout the galaxy. They said they wanted to study different environments and learn about alien cultures. Every species welcomed them. Humans were polite guests who always cleaned up after themselves and brought gifts for their hosts." Kellen 9 visited several human research stations over the years. They were always exactly what they appeared to be: scientists studying rocks, or plants, or weather patterns, libraries full of information about local history and culture, medical centers that provided free treatment to anyone who needed it. But he also noticed things that seemed strange for research stations: very strong communication equipment, storage areas that seemed too large for the number of people living there, landing pads that could handle much bigger ships than the small research vessels he usually saw. When he asked about these things, the humans always had reasonable explanations. The communication equipment was for sending research data back to Earth. The storage areas held emergency supplies in case of disasters. The big landing pads were for cargo ships bringing supplies. All perfectly logical, all completely believable. But Kellen 9 started paying more attention to human cargo ships. They were big, ungainly vessels that moved slowly and carried enormous amounts of supplies to human colonies and research stations. The humans explained that Earth was far away, so they had to send everything in bulk to make the trips worthwhile. Reasonable, logical, believable. But one day, Kalen 9 was running scans on shipping routes for the consortium's trade commission. He noticed something odd in the data. Human cargo ships always took slightly longer routes than necessary. They made stops at empty systems that had nothing valuable in them. They lingered in deep space for days at a time. When he mentioned this, to Chen, she nodded thoughtfully. "Space is dangerous," she said. "Our ships carry emergency supplies. If we break down in an empty system, we need to be able to survive until help arrives. Sometimes we stop to check our equipment or give the crew rest breaks. Again, perfectly reasonable." But that night, Kellen 9 had trouble sleeping. He kept thinking about human cargo ships making mysterious stops in empty space, about research stations with landing pads for ships that never seemed to arrive, about humans who were never surprised by anything, no matter how unexpected, about a species that came from a world so dangerous it had turned them into weapons, but who chose to be shields instead. The next morning, he decided he was being paranoid. Humans were gentle. They had proven it over and over again. They followed every rule, respected every custom, helped anyone who asked. But deep in his mind, a small voice whispered, "What happens when gentle giants stop being gentle?" Hive Queen Zaxth felt the disturbance in the web of minds 3 cycles before the first Velnari ship appeared on any scanner. Her species could sense aggressive thoughts across vast distances, and the crystalline empire's mental signature was like acid poured on exposed nerves. The Velnari had been expanding for years, but always toward the galactic rim where fewer civilized species lived. They preferred easy targets, single-world colonies, mining outposts, trading stations with minimal defenses. Their crystal ships were nearly indestructible, and their psychic commanders could control weaker minds from light years away. Zaxth had tried to warn the consortium about the growing threat, but most species saw the Velnari as a distant problem. They attacked primitive worlds far from the galactic center. Surely they would not dare approach the protected core systems where the great civilizations lived. She was wrong. The first attack came without warning. The Velnari crystal fleet emerged from hyperspace above the peaceful world of Green Dream, home to the garden tenders who grew most of the galaxy's food. The garden tenders had no weapons, no shields, no way to fight back. They sent desperate messages begging for help. By the time rescue ships arrived, half the planet was stripped bare. The Velnari did not just take resources. They took living beings and drained their life energy to power their crystal technology. The survivors described the horror of feeling their strength, their memories, their very souls being slowly pulled away while their bodies remained alive and aware. The consortium held emergency sessions. They passed resolutions condemning the attacks. They imposed trade sanctions that the Velnari ignored. They sent strongly worded diplomatic messages that the Crystal Empire did not bother to answer. Meanwhile, the attacks continued. Zacht felt each one through the web of minds. The collector folk, who gathered rare metals from asteroid fields. Gone. The song weavers whose music could heal psychological trauma. Gone. The memory keepers who maintained the historical records of dozens of species. Gone. Each time, the pattern was the same. Crystal ships would appear, overwhelm any defenses with their superior technology, and begin the harvesting process. They took everything of value, resources, technology, and most terrifyingly, living beings to fuel their psychic machines. The human response was typically measured and diplomatic. Ambassador Chen requested permission to send human medical ships to help survivors. She offered to share human defensive technologies with threatened worlds. She proposed joint patrols in vulnerable systems. Every suggestion was reasonable, helpful, and entirely within the bounds of the Terran doctrine. But Zacht noticed something else. Human cargo ships began making more frequent runs to the outer colonies. Human research stations reported increased activity. Human medical ships started carrying much larger crews than normal. When questioned, the humans provided their usual, reasonable explanations. More cargo ships meant better supplies for colonists who might need to evacuate quickly. Research stations were studying Velnari technology to find defensive solutions. Medical ships needed bigger crews to handle the increasing number of injured refugees. All logical, all believable, all perfectly in line with humanity's helpful nature. But Zacht could sense something else through the web of minds. Human thoughts had a different quality now. Still controlled, still careful, but with an underlying tension that had not been there before. Like a spring being slowly compressed, the Velnari noticed human activity too. They began testing human defenses with small raids on colonies under Terran protection. Each attack was carefully calculated to cause damage without triggering a major response. They destroyed supply depots, captured small groups of civilians, attacked isolated research stations. The humans responded exactly as their doctrine required. They sent rescue ships to help survivors. They increased patrols in vulnerable areas. They offered compensation for damages and medical care for the injured. They filed formal complaints with the consortium and requested mediation talks. The Velnari interpreted this restraint as weakness. Their raids became bolder. Zacht watched the pattern develop with growing alarm. She had studied human history during their first contact 50 years ago. She knew what humans were capable of when they stopped holding back. But the current generation of galactic leaders had never seen humans fight. They saw only the gentle giants who helped with construction projects and settled disputes with kind words. The crisis came when the consortium finally agreed to hold peace talks. Ambassador Chen personally traveled to the neutral station at Harmony, point to meet with Velnari representatives. The entire galaxy watched, hoping that diplomacy might finally end the expanding war. Zacht was there as an observer. She felt the crystalline minds of the Velnari delegation like knives scraping against her consciousness. Their leader, High Harvester Kothvar, barely acknowledged the other species present. In his mind, they were all just future resources to be collected and processed. Chen began with the traditional diplomatic opening, expressions of hope for peace, offers of mutual benefit, requests for understanding between different cultures. Kothvar listened for exactly 37 seconds before interrupting. "You speak of peace while your species spreads across our hunting grounds," he said. His voice carried psychic overtones that made several delegates wince in pain. "Your colonies occupy worlds we have marked for harvest. Your ships interfere with our collection operations." "We seek only to protect innocent lives," Chen replied calmly. "Surely we can find a solution that allows your people to expand without harming others." Kothvar's crystalline features twisted into what might have been a smile. "Life is a resource, like minerals or energy. We require it to power our civilization. Your concept of innocent is meaningless." "Then what do you propose?" Chen asked. "Withdraw your protection from the outer rim. Allow us to harvest the primitive species there. In exchange, we will not advance toward the core worlds for 100 cycles." The offer sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. Most species would consider it reasonable. Sacrifice the distant colonies to protect the civilized center. It was harsh, but practical. Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was still perfectly controlled, but Zakth felt something change in the human's mental signature. "And if we refuse, then we will demonstrate why resistance is futile," Kothvar said. "We have identified a suitable target for our next major harvest. A refugee colony called Haven, where your species has gathered the weak and useless from dozens of worlds. We will process them slowly, broadcasting the procedure so all may see the price of defying us." Zakth felt the temperature in the room seem to drop. Chen's expression did not change, but the quality of her thoughts shifted dramatically. The careful restraint that had defined human mental patterns for 50 years began to crack. "You would." "Target refugees," Chen said. "It was not a question. The weak exist to serve the strong. That is the natural order." Chen stood slowly. She was not the tallest being in the room, but suddenly she seemed to tower over everyone present. "I see," she said quietly. "Then these talks are concluded." She turned and walked toward the exit. At the doorway, she paused. "High Harvester Kothvar," she said, without turning around. "You have just made the biggest mistake in your species' history." Through the web of minds, Zakth felt the first stirrings of something that would soon terrify the galaxy. 50 years of careful human restraint was beginning to unravel. The gentle giants were remembering what they really were, and, for the first time since the Velnari expansion began, Zakth felt sorry for the Crystal Empire. Captain Mordun had been hauling medical supplies for 30 years, and he thought he had seen every kind of disaster the galaxy could produce. Plague outbreaks, mining accidents, pirate raids, natural disasters. His cargo hold had carried everything, from emergency food rations to artificial organs for species, whose biology was completely different from his own. But nothing had prepared him for Haven Colony. The distress signal reached his ship while he was 3 days out from the healer's station at Mercy Point. Haven was supposed to be a safe place, one of the special colonies that humans had established for refugees who could not survive on normal worlds. The old, the sick, the disabled, the survivors of species whose home worlds had been destroyed. 40,000 beings from dozens of different races, all living peacefully under human protection. The signal was not a request for help. It was a warning to stay away. Mordun almost turned around. His ship was a simple cargo hauler with no weapons and minimal shields. But the signal mentioned children, and Mordun had younglings of his own back on the home world. He changed course for Haven. The first thing he saw when he dropped out of hyperspace was the Velnari fleet. 40 crystal ships hanging in space like frozen lightning, their faceted hulls reflecting the light of Haven's sun. They were arranged in a perfect sphere around the planet, making escape impossible. Morden's sensors showed massive energy readings from the planet's surface. The Velnari were not just attacking Haven. They were harvesting it. He had heard stories about Velnari harvesting, but seeing it made his stomach turn inside out. Massive crystal towers had been erected across the colony. Purple energy flowed. Between them, invisible streams, and Morden's instruments detected something that his mind refused to believe. Concentrated life force being extracted and stored. The Velnari were not just killing the refugees. They were slowly draining their life energy while keeping them alive and conscious. The process could take days. Morden's communications array picked up the Velnari broadcast. High Harvester Kothvar appeared on his screen, standing in what looked like the colony's main square. Behind him, Morden could see rows of containment fields holding hundreds of beings from different species. They were all still alive, but their bodies were withered and their eyes were empty of hope. "People of the galaxy," Kothvar announced, "witness the fate of those who resist our expansion. The humans promised to protect these weak creatures. Where are their defenders now?" As if in answer to his question, 3 ships dropped out of hyperspace. Morden almost laughed when he saw them. 2 human vessels that he recognized as standard colony support ships and 1 small escort destroyer. Against 40 Velnari dreadnoughts, they might as well have been throwing rocks at a mountain. Then Captain Elena Vasquez of the UTS Mercy's End opened a communication channel to the entire system. "This is humanity's final diplomatic message," she said. Her voice was calm, almost casual. "Release the survivors immediately, surrender for trial, or face the consequences of making Deathworlders stop playing nice." High Harvester Kothvar's response was to execute 100 prisoners on live broadcast. What happened next would be remembered by every species in the galaxy for generations to come. The human destroyer, which should not have been able to scratch Velnari crystal armor, fired a single shot at the nearest enemy dreadnought. Not an energy beam or a missile, but something that registered on Morden's sensors as a simple chunk of metal moving at tremendous speed. The Velnari ship exploded. Not damaged, not disabled, completely destroyed, scattered into glittering fragments that drifted away like deadly snow. "Kinetic impactor," Captain Vasquez explained over the open channel, her voice still perfectly calm. "Standard asteroid mining equipment. Amazing what happens when you remove the safety limiters and reverse the polarity." The Velnari fleet reacted instantly, turning their weapons on the tiny human force. Crystal beams that could melt through. The hulls of battleships lanced out toward the 3 human ships. The beams never connected. The human vessels moved like they were dancing. Not the slow, ponderous maneuvers of normal space combat, but quick, precise movements that seemed to predict where the Velnari would fire before they fired. It was like watching leaves blown by the wind, impossible to pin down or hit. "Interesting," Captain Vasquez commented as crystal death beams passed harmlessly around her ship. "Your targeting systems assume we'll move like other species. Large, slow adjustments to heading and speed, but we learned space combat in the asteroid fields around Earth, where a single mistake means getting crushed by a rock the size of a city. We had to get good at not being where the dangerous things expected us to be." More human ships began arriving. At first just a few, then dozens, then hundreds. They seemed to appear from empty space, as if they had been hiding in the void, between the stars. Morden checked his sensors and realized that was exactly what they had been doing. The ships were running completely silent. No active scanners, no communications, no energy signatures above basic life support. They had been drifting in the system for hours, maybe days, waiting for the signal to attack. "How long have you been here?" Kothvar demanded over the communication channel. For the first time, the High Harvester sounded less than perfectly confident. "We've been here since you started threatening our people," Captain Vasquez replied. "Did you really think we would leave a refugee colony undefended? We've been tracking your fleet since you left your home system." The Velnari ships tried to regroup, forming defensive formations that had served them well in previous battles. Against any other species, their superior technology and psychic abilities would have been overwhelming. But humans, it turned out, did not fight like other species. Where most civilizations used energy weapons and guided missiles, humans threw rocks. Very fast rocks, but still just chunks of metal and stone accelerated to incredible speeds. The Velnari crystal armor that deflected energy beams like light off a mirror could not stop solid matter moving at significant fractions of light speed. Where most species relied on complex targeting computers and predictive algorithms, humans seemed to fire by instinct. They did not calculate where their enemies would be. They simply knew. 5 billion years of evolution, Captain Vasquez explained as her ships systematically destroyed the Velnari fleet. Every day on Earth, something tried to kill our ancestors. Predators that could outrun us, outclimb us, outswim us. We survived by becoming better at killing than anything else on our world. We learned to hunt in packs, to predict our prey's movements, to never give up once we decided something needed to die. Most terrifying of all was how calm the humans remained. Other species fought with anger or fear or desperation. The humans sounded like they were having a casual conversation while they methodically destroyed ships that had conquered entire star systems. The funny thing about being gentle, Captain Vasquez continued as the last Velnari dreadnought broke apart under a barrage of kinetic rounds, is that it's a choice. We can choose to be kind, patient, forgiving, but we can also choose not to be. The space battle lasted exactly 18 minutes. When it was over, 40 Velnari ships had been reduced to scrap metal, and the human fleet had not lost a single vessel. But the real shock came when human marines began landing on Haven Colony. Morden watched through his ship's cameras as they moved through the Velnari ground forces like they were not even there. The crystal soldiers that had terrorized the galaxy fought with energy weapons and psychic domination. The humans fought with projectile weapons that fired small pieces of metal very, very fast. And somehow, the humans seemed immune to Velnari psychic attacks. Telepathic resistance training, explained Sergeant Marcus Webb when asked about it later. We've been practicing mental discipline techniques for 50 years, just in case. Amazing what you can resist when you've raised teenagers. By the time Morden's cargo hauler reached Haven Colony, the fighting was over. Human medical teams were already treating the survivors, their gentle hands working to undo the damage that the Velnari harvesting process had caused. The refugees looked at their rescuers with wonder and terror. These were the same humans who had built their schools and hospitals, who had brought them food and medicine, who had played games with their children and listened to their stories. But they were also the beings who had just destroyed an entire enemy fleet in 18 minutes. Captain Vasquez found Mordoon in the colony's main square, where he was helping to unload medical supplies. "Thank you for coming," she said simply. "The children needed those medicines." Morden looked around at the human soldiers who were carefully helping elderly refugees to the medical stations. The same hands that had just operated weapons of incredible destruction were now gently supporting beings who could barely walk. "I thought you were peaceful," he said. Captain Vasquez smiled, and for the first time since the battle began, her expression was not entirely gentle. "We are peaceful," she said, "right up until someone hurts our children." War chronicler Thekmor had seen 17 major conflicts across the galaxy, and he thought he understood the nature of warfare. Armies clashed, strategies unfolded over months or years, victories were won through superior technology or numbers, or tactics. Even the most decisive battles took days to resolve. The 72-hour war changed everything he thought he knew about combat. It began 3 hours after the rescue of Haven Colony, when the Velnari throne world received word that their harvesting fleet had been completely destroyed. Thekmor was embedded with the consortium's military observers, monitoring communications between the major powers as the galaxy held its breath waiting for the Crystal Empire's response. High Harvester Supreme Vakthul, ruler of the Velnari, sent a message that chilled every civilized species. The insignificant mammals have destroyed valuable resources. They will be harvested in return. All human colonies will be processed. Their home world will be cracked open and its core used to power our expansion fleets. The threat should have been empty posturing. The Velnari throne world was protected by thousands of crystal ships, psychic barrier fields that could drive enemy crews insane from light years away, and orbital defense platforms that had never been breached in 3,000 years of empire. But 37 minutes after the declaration of war, human ships began appearing throughout Velnari space, not arriving, appearing, as if they had been there all along, hidden and waiting. Thekmor's instruments detected massive fleet movements in 17 different systems simultaneously. Cargo. Haulers revealed themselves to be troop transports. Mining ships dropped their disguises and became heavy cruisers. Scientific research vessels transformed into mobile command centers. How? Thekmor asked Captain Sarah Chen, who had arrived at the observation station to coordinate the consortium's response to the crisis. "We've been preparing," Chen said simply. "For 50 years, we've been very quietly getting ready for the day someone would push too far." The scope of human preparation was staggering. Every civilian vessel in human space had military capabilities. Every research station was a fortress. Every mining operation was a weapons factory. For half a century, while maintaining their peaceful facade, humanity had been building the largest and most advanced military force the galaxy had ever seen. "You've been lying to us," accused Ambassador Krilltak of the Consortium Security Council. "No," Chen replied calmly. "We told you we were keeping our military small and defensive. We never said we weren't building anything. We just built it with other names." The Velnari found out just how extensive human preparations were when they tried to attack the human colony of New Geneva. Intelligence reports said it was a farming world with minimal defenses. The Crystal Fleet that arrived expecting an easy harvest instead found a fully operational fortress world with weapon systems that made their own technology look primitive. Thekmor watched the battle recordings with growing amazement. The human defenders did not just repel the attack, they captured it. Velnari ships found themselves surrounded by invisible force fields, their crews transported off their vessels and into holding cells before they realized what was happening. "Transporter technology," Chen explained when he asked. "We've had it for 30 years. Amazing what you can develop when you really put your mind to it." But the real revelation came when human forces began their counterattack against the Velnari home systems. Thekmor had studied the Crystal Empire's defenses extensively. Their worlds were protected by layers of psychic barriers that could drive enemy crews insane, energy fields that disrupted mechanical systems, and fleets of crystal ships that had never lost a major engagement. The human assault fleets went through these defenses like they were not there. "Psychic resistance training," Captain Chen explained as reports came in of human marines walking through mental barrier fields that should have reduced them to gibbering madness. "We've been practicing meditation and mental discipline techniques for decades, just in case." "But why?" Thekmor asked. "The Velnari were not a threat 50 years ago when you started preparing." Chen's smile was almost sad. "They weren't the only psychic species in the galaxy. We prepared for every possible threat from every member of the consortium. We hoped we would never need to use any of it." The implications of that statement hit Thekmor like a physical blow. Humanity had not just been preparing to fight the Velnari, they had been preparing to fight everyone. "Do you have plans for war against my people too?" he asked quietly. "We have plans for protecting your people," Chen corrected, "along with everyone else in the galaxy. Whether that requires fighting against them or fighting for them depends on their choices." The human advance through Velnari space was unlike anything in military history. Instead of massive fleet engagements, human forces simply appeared at key locations and took control. They did not destroy Velnari infrastructure. They captured it. along with detailed records of every world the Crystal Empire had harvested, every species they had enslaved, every resource they had stolen. Most shocking of all was how the humans fought. Thekmor had expected them to use their advanced technology to overwhelm Velnari defenses. Instead, they seemed to specialize in turning the enemy's strengths against them. Velnari crystal ships were powered by harvested life energy. Human boarding parties carried devices that could reverse the flow, draining the ship's power while revitalizing any surviving prisoners. Velnari psychic commanders used mental domination to control their forces. Human infiltrators carried psionic dampeners that not only blocked the psychic attacks but reflected them back at their source. Velnari ground forces relied on energy weapons that could disintegrate most matter. Human armor was made from compressed carbon, arranged in crystalline structures that absorbed and redirected energy attacks. "We studied you," Captain Chen explained to a captured Velnari commander during one of the recorded interrogations. "For 50 years, we studied every species in the galaxy. We learned your technologies, your tactics, your weaknesses. We prepared countermeasures for every possible threat." "But we were not threatening you 50 years ago," the Velnari protested. "You were conquering primitive worlds and enslaving their populations," Chen replied. "We knew that eventually you would look toward more valuable targets. We just wanted to be ready when you did." The war effectively ended when human forces reached the Velnari throne world. Thekmor was granted permission to observe the final assault through long-range sensors, and what he saw defied belief. The Crystal Empire's capital world was protected by the strongest defenses they had ever built. Psychic barrier fields that could kill unprotected mines from orbit, energy shields that could deflect the output of an entire star, weapon platforms that could crack moons in half. A single human marine, Sergeant Marcus Webb, walked through all of it. Not ran. Not fought his way through. Walked. Like he was taking a casual stroll through a park. The psychic barriers that should have destroyed his mind barely seemed to register. The energy fields that should have disintegrated his body simply flowed around his armor. The automated defense systems that should have vaporized him apparently could not lock onto his position. "How is this possible?" Thekmor asked Captain Chen. "Marcus has 3 children back on Earth," Chen said, as if that explained everything. 2 teenagers and a toddler. After dealing with them every day for 16 years, alien mind tricks seemed pretty manageable. But Thekmor suspected there was more to it than that. The humans' advance through the most dangerous defenses in the galaxy was too perfect, too precise. It was like he knew exactly where every trap was, exactly how every system worked, exactly what he needed to do to disable them without triggering their backups. "You've been here before," he realized. Chen nodded. "We've been studying Velnari technology for decades. This is not our first visit to their capital world. It's just the first time we've come openly." The war ended when Sergeant Webb reached the Velnari throne room and placed High Harvester Supreme Vakthul under arrest. The entire Crystal Empire surrendered 17 minutes later. But the real shock came in the aftermath, when human forces began releasing the millions of beings. The Velnari had harvested over the centuries, creatures that had been thought extinct, civilizations that had been wiped from galactic records, entire species that had been enslaved for generations. The humans had not just defeated the Velnari. They had liberated everyone the Crystal Empire had ever conquered. "This was never about conquest," Captain Chen explained to the assembled consortium leaders. "It was about justice, about making sure that what happened to Haven Colony never happens to anyone else." Thekmor looked around at the human forces that now controlled the largest military fleet in galactic history. They could have used their victory to establish their own empire, to demand tribute from other species, to become the new dominant power in the galaxy. Instead, they were using it to heal the wounds that the Velnari had inflicted. "What happens now?" he asked. Captain Chen's expression was as gentle as it had been 50 years ago when humanity first joined the consortium. But now Thekmore understood what that gentleness really meant. "Now we go back to being peaceful," she said, "until someone gives us a reason not to be." Historical archivist Prime Yelandra had lived for over 300 years, and she had thought she understood the flow of galactic history. Civilizations rose and fell in predictable patterns. Empires expanded until they grew too large to manage, then collapsed under their own weight. Wars were fought over resources, territory, or ideology, and the winners wrote the history books. But the aftermath of the 72-hour war broke every pattern she had ever studied. The humans had won the most decisive military victory in recorded history. They controlled the largest fleet ever assembled, had access to technology that made other species look primitive, and had demonstrated that they could defeat any enemy that chose to fight them. By every historical precedent, they should have used their victory to establish a new galactic empire with themselves as the ruling species. Instead, they went home. "I don't understand," Yelandra said to Ambassador Chen during the post-war negotiations. "You have the power to rule the galaxy. Why are you giving it up?" Chen looked tired. The gentle human had aged visibly during the war, and her eyes held a sadness that had not been there before. "Because ruling was never the point," she said. "We didn't fight to conquer. We fought to protect." The humans kept their word. Within 6 months of the Velnari surrender, human military forces had withdrawn to their pre-war positions. The massive fleets that had appeared from nowhere vanished just as mysteriously. The advanced weapons that had defeated the Crystal Empire were quietly dismantled or converted back to civilian use, but everyone in the galaxy knew that the weapons could be rebuilt, the fleets could reappear, the gentle giants could stop being gentle again any time they chose. The real changes came in the Galactic Consortium itself. The old system of endless debates and compromise solutions had failed catastrophically when faced with the Velnari threat. Something new was needed. The humans proposed what they called the Protected Galaxy Doctrine. It was simple in concept. Any species that attacked civilian populations, enslaved other beings, or committed genocide would face immediate intervention by the consortium's new enforcement arm. That enforcement arm would be led by humans. "You're making yourselves the galaxy's police force," observed Councillor Vextai of the Commerce Guild. "We're making ourselves the galaxy's guardians," Chen corrected. "There's a difference. Police enforce laws. Guardians protect the innocent. The ICE distinction mattered. Under the old system, the consortium had been paralyzed by bureaucracy when swift action was needed. The new system gave the human-led Guardian Corps authority to act first and explain later when civilian lives were at stake. Most species supported the new arrangement enthusiastically. They had seen what happened when the humans stopped playing nice, and they much preferred having that power protecting them rather than threatening them. A few species objected, claiming that human dominance was just another form of empire. Their protests carried little weight after the revelation of the Terran protocols. Yelandra had been granted access to the classified human archives as part of her historical research, and what she found there changed her understanding of the past 50 years completely. The humans had not just been preparing for war against the Velnari, they had been preparing detailed protection plans for every species in the galaxy. The files were staggering in their complexity. Defensive strategies for worlds that had never been threatened. Evacuation plans for species that lived on stable, safe planets. Medical protocols for treating injuries that no one had ever suffered. Economic support systems for civilizations that might collapse if their trade routes were disrupted. Most disturbing of all were the files marked Internal Threat Response. These contained detailed plans for protecting consortium members from other consortium members. If the warrior clans had ever decided to resume their ancient raiding, the humans were ready. If the corporate syndicate had tried to establish economic slavery, the humans were ready. If any species had chosen conquest over cooperation, the humans were ready. "You've been watching us," Yolandra said to Chen after reviewing the files. "All of us, for 50 years. "We've been protecting you," Chen replied, "even from yourselves, if necessary." The implications were terrifying and comforting at the same time. Humanity had appointed itself as the guardian of galactic civilization, but they had been doing it quietly, secretly, without anyone's knowledge or consent. "What gave you the right?" Yolandra asked. Chen was quiet for a long moment before answering. "We're from a death world," she said finally. "We understand violence in ways that most species don't. We know what happens when the strong prey on the weak, when cooperation breaks down, when civilization fails." She gestured toward the window where the lights of a dozen different species' ships could be seen in the space around the station. "Look at what you've all built here," she said. "Art, music, literature, science, philosophy, species that should be natural enemies working together to create something beautiful. We couldn't let that be destroyed." The Protected Galaxy Doctrine was formally adopted by a vote of 1,147 to 23, with 156 abstentions. The few opposing votes came mainly from species that had been planning their own expansion campaigns and realized those plans were no longer viable. The real test came 6 months later, when the Predator clans launched a surprise attack on the peaceful flower world of Gentle Meadows. It was exactly the kind of raid that would have taken the old consortium months to respond to, if they responded at all. The Human Guardian Corps arrived 4 hours after the first distress signal. The battle lasted 6 minutes. The Predator clans surrendered and formally apologized for the attack. Their leader, War Chief Kralthar, made a public statement that became famous throughout the galaxy. "We thought the humans had grown soft during their years of peace. We were wrong. They are not soft. They are patient. There is a difference, and it is a difference that can kill you." After that, the number of aggressive actions throughout the galaxy dropped to nearly 0. Pirates found new careers. Warlords disbanded their armies. Entire species reformed their governments to avoid being classified as threats to galactic peace. But the most significant change was in how species interacted with each other. The old system of careful alliances and mutual defense pacts gave way to something unprecedented: genuine cooperation. When the hive minds faced a plague that threatened their colonial worlds, 17 different species volunteered resources to help develop a cure. When the Crystal Singer's home star began showing signs of instability, dozens of civilizations offered to help relocate their entire population. When the Memory Keepers needed to upgrade their historical archives, the galaxy's greatest engineers competed for the honor of helping them. "Fear?" Ambassador Chen said when Yolandra asked her about the new spirit of cooperation. "No. Understanding. Everyone knows that we'll protect them if they're threatened. But they also know that we'll stop them if they threaten others. It's amazing how much cooperation you can achieve when everyone feels safe." The changes went deeper than politics. Art, science, and culture flourished as species that had never trusted each other began working together. The humans contributed their own unique perspectives, but they also facilitated connections between others. Yolandra watched human diplomats carefully mediating disputes between species with incompatible biologies, human engineers helping to build impossible projects that required technologies from dozens of different civilizations, human soldiers standing guard over the galaxy's most precious treasures not as conquerors, but as protectors. Most remarkably, the humans seemed genuinely happy with their role. They showed no signs of wanting to expand their influence or accumulate more power. They appeared content to be the galaxy's guardians, stepping in only when protection was needed, then stepping back again when the crisis passed. "Don't you ever want more?" Yolandra asked Chen during one of their conversations. "You could rule everything. Make every species follow human laws, adopt human customs, speak human languages." Chen looked horrified at the suggestion. Why would we want that? The galaxy is beautiful because it's diverse. Every species contributes something unique. Our job is to make sure that diversity can continue to flourish. As Yelandra compiled her historical records, she realized that humanity's greatest achievement was not military victory or technological advancement. It was the creation of something that had never existed before in galactic history, a truly stable civilization. For the first time in millennia, every species in the galaxy could focus on creation instead of destruction, on cooperation instead of competition, on building the future instead of merely surviving the present. The Terran doctrine had evolved from a set of self-imposed limitations to a galaxy-wide philosophy. Strength was not for conquest, but for protection. Power was not for domination, but for service. Victory was not over enemies, but over the fear and hatred that had kept civilizations apart for so long. In her final report, Yelandra wrote, "The humans call themselves Deathworlders, but they have become life-bringers. They learned the arts of war on a planet that tried to kill them every day, but they used those skills to nurture peace. They have the power to destroy any civilization in the galaxy, and they use that power to ensure that no civilization needs to fear destruction